Hello. In this video we're going to be covering a new instrument, a melodic instrument that I've created in Ableton Live using Novation Launchpad and dummy clips and some various Ableton Live effects that come bundled with the program. So let's take a look at it. Okay, so first of all, this instrument is controlled with the use of dummy clips. Now, what that means is I'm not actually playing MIDI notes from a MIDI controller directly into an instrument. Instead, I'm using a series of clips in other tracks being routed to kind of a master track to interpret all the MIDI data. So if you look here, I have a series of 8 tracks that each have one MIDI clip in them. Now, within each MIDI clip, there is a single note. This note is 16 bars long. This particular one starts at A2. Now, each of these clips goes up progressively, B2, C3, D3, E3, etc. From A to A, 1 octave, and covers that span. Now, since I'm not using a quote-unquote keyboard instrument that has predefined MIDI note values for each key, I'm using a Novation Launchpad. To trigger these, I've actually MIDI mapped the play buttons on each of these clips to a series of 1 row on the Launchpad to correspond with the 8 different clips. So what that does is every time I push a button, it plays the clip. Now, ordinarily, by default, if I was to hit the play button, it would play the entire clip from beginning to end until I triggered another clip in this track or I hit the stop button. Now, the way to change that is you go into your launch section of the clip. And under launch mode, by default, it will be set to trigger. What you want to do is switch that to gate. So basically, that turns the play button on these clips into kind of an on-off momentary toggle. So you're holding it, it plays, you let go of the button, it stops. Very much the same way that a traditional keyboard MIDI controller or synth would work. So now once all of the notes on the Launchpad are mapped to the play buttons, the next step is to send this MIDI data to a track that actually has an instrument on it that can process the MIDI data from just that MIDI data into audio. So on all of these tracks, I've set the MIDI 2 to this track here called the LP Synth. Now, all of these individual notes are all going to the LP Synth. So anything I play is coming in here. As you can see, as I trigger, I have volume coming in right here. Now, within the LP Synth, I have a whole bunch of different instrument racks and effects. Some of these I'll get into later, but for this video, what I'm going to go over is the methods that I use to get pitch variation. Now, since there's only these 8 notes, it seems somewhat limiting in what I can play. The way I fix that is by adding a series of pitch effects. Now, the pitch effect is a MIDI effect, and it can take any incoming MIDI data and transpose it by a range of semitones that you predefine in this selector here. So what I've done is I've added 3 different pitch instruments. One is set to -12 semitones, which is an octave. One is set to +12 semitones, which is an octave. And then one is a variable scale. So the octave selectors I have mapped their on-off switches to buttons on the launch pad. So with a push of a button, I can go octave down or an octave up. So that expands the overall range to a good 3 octaves in this. Now, the variable slider, I've mapped a range of semitones in this to a row on the launch pad. So by default it's at 0. Since my first note coming in was an A, this will be an A. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. Or I can transpose it up 1 semitone. So it starts at A sharp. Another one, B, C, etc. Across a spectrum of semitones, 8 semitones. Now, this in combination with the octave selector gives a good range of notes that I can play with just these same 8 keys, and it allows me to stay within a certain confines of the launch pad. The other interesting effect that I've added, now since this starts at A, ends at A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, that is an A minor scale. So by default, everything in this is going to be a minor. When you transpose up 1 semitone, it's still going to be a minor scale. It'll just be an A sharp minor scale. Now, by adding a scale instrument, this is another MIDI effect, it takes all incoming notes and can adjust them to the nearest note in the scale that you predefine. So in this case, I've selected a major scale. So by turning it on, by default, it's a minor scale. If I turn it on, these same notes become a major scale. So this selection of major and minor in combination with the transpose buttons and the octave buttons really gives me a wide range of playability with just these 8 notes on the launch pad. So essentially these notes are, it's almost a key selector of sorts. So if I'm in minor, if I know the people I'm playing with are doing something in A minor, boom, I've got all my natural notes in the A minor scale. If they're doing something in C major, I can play anything in C major. So it gives me a lot of flexibility if I know what everyone around me is doing, or if if I'm trying to play along with a pre-recorded song, if I know what key that's in, I can improvise anything around that while using just this one row of buttons here. So that covers some of the basics of this LP synth instrument that I've created. Next week I'm going to go into more detail with some of these other effects and instruments that I use for this. So come back next week and check it out. Alright, bye.